What a statement it could be if Texas wins the SEC in its first year. Or should I say, what a statement it will be.
You are Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your daily source to stay up to date with this, the greatest sport on planet Earth. This episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where you can get a big return. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get 150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. How Penn State can finally break through in a big game against Oregon. They're absolutely capable. Vegas agrees. And Connor Weigman's in the transfer portal. Is that the next Auburn quarterback? All coming up on today's show. But does Texas get payback against Georgia here? I believe that they do. Now, there are a couple things they must do in order for that to play out, but I believe they will. Key number one, they've got to be able to run the football better than they did in the first matchup. Do you understand how few yards were actually gained in the first matchup? For a former Big 12 school that is known for being a conference with little defense, a lot of offense, this was kind of an old-fashioned SEC slugfest, even more than the scoreboard indicated. 30-15, the final score. Both teams were under 300 yards of total offense. Both of them. This was a defensive struggle. Field position and turnovers reigned supreme. If the turnovers hadn't happened so close to the line of scrimmage and set up offenses deep in opponents' territory, you wouldn't have had 45 total points in this football game, because it wasn't a great day for either offense in Austin. But Texas ran for just 29 yards. That's not good enough. Now, one interesting factor that could very well come into play is Arch Manning. I fully expect Arch Manning to have a role in this game. You're not going to run Quinn Ewers for two reasons. Number one, he's not a supremely mobile quarterback, and he's not someone you do design quarterback runs for. And number two, he's a little dinged up. He's had the ankle problem. You watched Haynes King last week against this Georgia defense in Athens enforce their will on the ground. How? With a lot of fly sweep motion and quarterback run action and quarterback counters and quarterback reads. Those plays were very successful against Georgia right up until they ran one too many and Haynes King fumbled and Georgia was able to escape with a victory. So the Bulldogs and the Longhorns are into the playoff no matter what happens in this game. It's just a matter of who gets a first round bye. For Texas, dealing with a quarterback who's got a little bit of an ankle problem, yeah, I bet you they would love to have a first-round bye. For Georgia, that hasn't always had their I's and T's dotted and crossed throughout the course of this year, I bet they would love to have a first-round bye. Where does Kirby Smart feel more dangerous? As an underdog, as he is in this particular game, or is he more dangerous off of a bye? I don't know. You tell me. But I'd be hard-pressed to see Steve Sarkisian watch the game tape of that Georgia Tech matchup and say, we're not going to bring Arch Manning into the fold. We don't want to do quarterback run situations. I think they absolutely do. I think they will. I think they should. So that's the first thing that Texas has to do. The second thing, they've got to win the turnover battle. They lost it against Georgia. They had 4 turnovers. There were 7 turnovers in the game, which is pretty incredible. There were fumbles, there were interceptions, all sorts of things. And the reason that I've got confidence in Texas winning this game is twofold. And the first reason is turnovers. Which quarterback do you trust to protect the ball more? My answer is Quinn Ewers. That doesn't mean I trust Quinn Ewers over any quarterback in the country protecting the ball in a big game or looking sharp when the bright lights are on. It does mean, based on what we have seen through 12 games this season, I think it's a pretty good sample size. I know Quinn Ewers hasn't played in all of them, but still, it's enough. I trust Quinn Ewers more than I trust Carson Beck. If Carson Beck doesn't turn the ball over, yeah, Georgia probably wins this football game. But that Texas defense is really good. And I think they have been playing better football. What they did on the road against Texas A&M is far more impressive than what we last saw from Georgia's defense when they took on Georgia Tech. I almost said Georgia A&M. We were almost crossing wires a bit there. But when they took on Georgia Tech, they gave up almost 300 yards of offense in the first half. A lot of it was on the ground. They were not good. This has not been the same Georgia defense consistently. In spurts, it has shown up, but consistently, it hasn't been there. And when you give Steve Sarkisian the opportunity to game plan in a big game, he tends to be good early, not as good in the second half. I think that'll be the case. But it was Georgia that got out to the big lead in the first meeting between these two teams. I think it'll be Texas that gets out to a lead, not a big one, but a lead. I think Texas wins this game. I think the defenses make adjustments, though, in the second half. 27-24, I'll take Texas by a field goal. The ghost of Justin Tucker will run through the veins of every special teams player for the Longhorns, and they find a way to go out there and get the win, which then would leave Georgia at 10-3. 10-3 Georgia. Where does that put them in the college football playoff rankings? Well, they're currently ranked number 5. That doesn't mean they'll be the number 5 seed per se, but they are ranked number 5. If they lose, do they just sit there? Are they completely unbudged? The committee's been pretty clear that if you're in the SEC championship game, not the ACC championship game, of course, but if you're in the SEC championship game, then you're not going to be punished for playing in that game and potentially losing it. So does that mean Georgia sit right there? Does that mean they get a home game? Does it? I mean, do they not face any consequences for playing an 8 overtime game against Georgia Tech and then losing to Texas? I don't know. I guess we'll have to wait and see. Based on what they've said, no, they will not. And then you will have the first 4 byes would be the Big Ten champion. Texas is the SEC champion. The Mountain West or Big 12 champion. And that's just the way that it goes. And whoever the ACC champion is. Those would be your 4 byes. I mean, frankly, Clemson could not get the bye and the Big 12 could. But I don't know. What do I know? We haven't seen the final rankings yet. We have ideas. We have the concepts of what the 12-team final rankings will look like, but we don't know yet because we have to see these conference championship games play out. I think this is a tight, competitive football game. I think they're all going to be. I'll be more than a little surprised if any of these conference championship games wind up being decided by a margin of greater than 10 to 14 points. Like, I don't see a Michigan against Iowa or a Michigan against Purdue or Ohio State for many years playing the same sorts of teams. I don't see that. I don't see that in the SEC championship game. I don't see it in the Big 12. I don't see it in the ACC. I don't see it in the Big 10. Penn State is playing really good football. I know Penn State hasn't had a great track record in those big sorts of games. They have been playing really good football. Now, Oregon is very good. We all know that and talk about that game in the second segment. But for the SEC champion, you're going to get a first-round bye. They don't have to worry about anything like that. I just wonder what happens with Georgia at 10-3, because that 3, that's a big number. That's a big number. But sometimes, as I've discussed, the committee decides to care about the number in the loss column, regardless of who you are, and sometimes they decide to not care. Georgia would certainly be a brand that can fall into the not caring department. But I think win or lose this game, I can still see either of these teams winning the national championship. Because at their best, they play at that sort of level. Texas's defense, people are finally coming around to what I've said for the last several months. One of the most underrated units in all of college football. Georgia does not have as high of a floor as they have in the last couple of seasons. But their ceiling is still pretty darn high. I don't think that's quite as high as it has been with their last 3 teams either. One of which won 13 games and 2 of which won national championships. I do still think their ceiling is one of the 5 to 6 highest in all of college football when they're playing at their best. And we'll see what kind of motivational tech Kirby Smart employs to get his team ready. I mean, they're underdogs. Texas is favored. You beat them on their field, and Texas is favored. How's that possible? I think Vegas knows what I have just laid out, which is Texas has been slightly more consistent. Just slightly. And I think they get it done. 27-24, I take the Longhorns. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter. Let's go to the Big Ten championship game. These are the biggest 2 conferences, right? SEC, Big Ten. I put them in the same show for that very reason. Penn State has had a big game problem, a top 10 team issue. How can they overcome that? I'll tell you how next. First, this episode brought to you by Mint Mobile. I love a great deal as much as the next guy, but I'm not going to jump through a bed of hot coals or run through a pouring rainstorm in order to get it. Luckily, Mint Mobile makes it easy to get wireless for $15 a month. Just $15 a month with the purchase of a 3-month plan, and it's easy for everyone, you included. To get started, go to mintmobile.com/lockedoncollege. There you'll see that right now all 3-month plans are only $15 a month, including the unlimited plan. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/lockedoncollege. That's mintmobile.com/lockedoncollege. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month with mintmobile.com/lockedoncollege. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. Mintmobile.com/lockedoncollege. Go check out Mint Mobile today. Can Penn State finally get a breakthrough in a big game? And yes, I'm going to go out on a limb and say Oregon counts. That's Roman Tomashoff, Locked On Huskies, here to discuss. Why is Roman here? Well, because Roman, you have seen your team get, shall we say, taken care of by both of these teams. Penn State wasn't close. Oregon also was not particularly close. Do you think this game on Saturday night will be tight?
Yeah, first of all, I knew that was exactly the route you were going to have to open with when you texted me about
I'm just laying out the facts.
No, notice how I'm not arguing that point at this particular moment. No, you're absolutely right. I do think it's going to be a close game where I look at this and I'm really intrigued by the matchups where Spencer, you did a fantastic job on Lockdown Ducks talking about the matchup with Tyler Warren, the Penn State tight end, where he's such a fun player to watch, just all the different ways they like using him, where you look at him and what they like lining him up in the Wildcat. One thing that's really interesting, a little stat, when Washington played Penn State to that point in the season, when Tyler Warren lined up as the Wildcat quarterback, on all but one of those plays did he take the carry. So there's a fairly high percentage that when he lines up in that spot, that he's going to keep the football. Just something
he tried to throw on one of them, didn't he? And it didn't work.
Yeah, that was that, and that was the Washington game. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but that's
I think you're right.
Just an interesting note there. So that's something I just really enjoy watching, just different inventive little things like that. But this game, Spencer, we talked about it over on the Big Ten Squad. This game's going to be won and lost in the trenches. That's the biggest thing here. And, having to watch Washington get overwhelmed in that department. I think there are a lot of great players in this game. Personally, and this is not even, coming from the flag in the background here, I think the best player in either trench right now is Abdul Carter. That guy is just so much fun to watch. He can be a real game changer. But I think Oregon's offensive line is pretty well equipped to handle him. So the more I watch it, the more I say this is going to be a really fun game. I think it's going to be a real close one.
Yeah, I don't expect there to be a blowout in conference championship weekend. I think, frankly, if there was going to be one, it'd be the Friday night game in the Mountain West, and Boise could run away from UNLV. And I don't expect that to happen, by the way. UNLV had every opportunity to win. They were at home for that one, and obviously won't be for the conference title game. But I think that every Power 4 game you can look at for the conference championships, you can say it's going to come down to the trenches, right? Oregon, Penn State, I agree with you. And I've talked about the same thing over on Locked On Ducks. Like that's where this matchup, I think, ultimately gets defined. Can Abdul Carter and company pressure Dylan Gabriel? If you can't, good luck. Good luck with that receiving core. But if you can, then Oregon's offense will look maybe more like it did in the first 2 games of the season when it struggled. Surprise, surprise, no quarterback is good when he's under pressure. Conversely, can Penn State protect Drew Aller? Because the Oregon defensive line maybe doesn't have a guy as good as Abdul Carter, but has got a couple of guys that are going to be playing on Sunday in Mateo Uyunglele and Jordan Birch, Derek Harmon as well on the interior. Like, they are deep. They are very talented. So that's why I think the trench matchup is so big. But I don't feel that way about every power conference game. I talked about the ACC on yesterday's show, and I said specifically, this is not a trenches game to me. I don't think that's where it gets defined. I think that game rides on which quarterback outplays the other. I think the same thing about the Mountain West title game. So it sounds blanket, generic, well, it's defined in the trenches. I think for this particular game, it really will be, because either side has the ability, Roman, to take over with their defensive line, and it's a matter of which side's going to be able to enforce their will more.
So I completely agree with you there. Let me throw one other key player at you in this game. That's Tatum Tuioti, the Oregon linebacker. where the more I look at him, just watching Drew Aller, I'm very high on Drew Aller's future. I think he has the potential to be a really, really good quarterback in the NFL. He's got all the intangibles. I hate making the Wyoming Josh Allen comparison to guys. I don't want to use it lightly, but that's what he is. That's what he can be. When he's on, it's wow. Look at this
I don't
guy.
know that he moves as well as Josh Allen does, but he's got a much bigger arm than most people probably think.
That's why I say Wyoming Josh Allen. We didn't know that he moved as well as he did once he got to the NFL. That's kind of where I get to that comparison. Where I say Drew Aller, we know he moves well. It's not that good. That's why I want to be clear. It's not that level, but he runs very effectively. He runs very well. He's very good at getting outside of the pocket when he needs to. So when I watched, Damon Williams get sacked 10 times by this Oregon defensive line, one guy that did a really fantastic job was Tatum Tuioti on the quarterback spies and just getting him out of the pocket when he does decide to roll out. And Damon, like I said, I'm a big fan of Drew Aller's athleticism. Damon is a much better athlete than Drew Aller is or ever will be. And I just look at it and I say, that's one of those guys where if you're able to contain him, if he gets outside the pocket, you're going to have a good time on defense. You could probably rack up 3-4 sacks. But I look at, this Penn State offensive line and I say, all right, are you going to be able to hold up? Because in the run game, they certainly haven't been able to over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and the thing that I wonder about with the passing game for Penn State, do you have an off speed that isn't Tyler Warren? That's your fastball, right? That's 98 coming down the middle or located up and in. Try and hit it. Good luck. He's got over 1,000 total yards this year, 978 of them, I think, and 6 touchdowns are through the air. Can Penn State protect Drew Aller enough to allow him to be effective, to allow him to create explosives like he did against USC? Because if there's a weakness on this Oregon defense, and there are not a lot, they're one of the 10 best in the country in yards allowed per game and points allowed per game. They've been really, really good. But if there is a weakness, their two safeties, Kobe Savage and Tysheem Johnson, I would not describe either one of them as dynamite cover guys. Tackling in the backfield and in space, really good. But over the top, they're not super rangy. One-on-one in coverage, they're not exceptional. And if Warren gets matched up with those guys, I don't know if that's going to be a favorable matchup for the Ducks. And I think they're going to rely on that defensive line, going back to what we talked about, how important the trenches are in this game. The Oregon defensive line, I think, is the best weapon that the Ducks have to try and slow down Tyler Warren in the passing attack.
So I agree with you there, but this is just another thing where what is this Penn State passing game going to look like in that sense? Where is Andy Kotelnick going to come into this game and say, hey, no matter what, even if I do want to trust my offensive line and, take a couple deep shots at Julian Fleming or whatever it is in that sense, are you is that really what you want to do? Or are you just going to come into this game and say, hey, we're going to spread them out. We're going to try to get as many guys as we can out into space and just utilize the quick passing game, or 2 seconds, that ball needs to be out. Whatever it is, just get the ball, make the read. And if you need to throw it at Tyler Warren 20 times like you did against USC, I don't like. Spencer,
and by the way, when Oregon played a limited Michigan passing attack with Colston Loveland, he had 7 catches for 119 yards. Yeah. You knew where the ball was going. They weren't able to come up with answers consistently.
Exactly. And that's my whole point, where you look at it and you say, again, they did that against USC. They knew that you could attack them there, and they did it. They did it over and over and over and over again, and did it really effectively, like for Verts and Madden, like you and I both on, or College Football 25, a little more accurate.
I'm an EA college football kind of guy.
As am I. But when I look at it, it's okay. Is that something that's going to work over and over again? If you want to just isolate Tyler Warren out wide, or is Oregon going to want to say, hey, let's put a corner out there on him, or is it going to be, hey, we're going to walk Kobe Savage down, we're going to walk Tysheem Johnson down and do something like that? I'm really curious how they're going to try to counter that.
Yeah, I am as well. Or do they put a linebacker out there? Devin Jackson's a guy who had a lot of success in pass coverage against Wisconsin, against Ashton Genty of Boise State earlier this year, had some great moments, and he's probably the fastest of the Oregon linebackers, but he's got the size to match up with Warren. So maybe that's where they go. I don't know. I think that's interesting. One other final thing before I hold you to a score prediction here is Oregon's rushing attack popped last week against Washington, and that's why they had 49 points. This is not an Oregon offense that will go for 35 or 40 plus and have 380 through the air. Like, Dylan Gabriel's good, capable, great wide receiving core, really good offensive line, one of the 3 finalists for the Joe Moore Award. For them to be at their best, they've got to be able to run the football. And they did that last week. For just the 4th time this year, they hit 200 yards on the ground. I don't know if you do that against Penn State, but if Oregon gets in the 175 range against Penn State, that is game over. That is absolutely game over. I think the underrated stat in this game is Oregon's offensive line ran all over Washington because they don't have the guys up front, but Penn State certainly is more capable in that department. Can they hold Oregon to 130, 120 like other teams have and make Dylan Gabriel throw the ball at a high level?
And the one thing that's going to come down to is tackling in space.
Yes.
Where I talked about on Locked On Huskies coming into the Oregon game, where you know that Jordan James is going to run through somebody.
Yes.
Where I texted you about that during the Washington game. I was having nightmares about this exact.
He's not going to run around you. He's going to run right through you.
He's going to run right through your face, and you need to try and stop it. And with I think Penn State has the bodies to do it, but with some of the injuries they've suffered in that front seven especially, we'll see what that's going to look like.
Roman Tomashoff, Locked On Huskies, your score prediction for the Big Ten title game. I've got Oregon 27-17.
I said this on the Big Ten squad the other day. I'm going to stick with it. Penn State 34, Oregon 31.
Oh, just like that. The W and all. Roman Tomashoff, appreciate it as always, my man.
Spencer, as always, thanks for having me.
Connor Weigman, quarterback of the future at Auburn. It's not the only spot that makes sense. That's coming up next. First, a reminder, this episode brought to you by FanDuel. They're America's number one sportsbook. Not number two, not number three, they are number one. And right now, new customers can bet $5 and get 150 in bonus bets if you win. Everything conference championship game related is over there. Point spreads, money line, over, under, you name it, they've got it. The FanDuel Sportsbook app also gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. 150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more, and bet college football as well with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Connor Weigman in the transfer portal. That's a name that we've heard more than a few times. Nobody has heard it or spoke it as many as my current guest, Andrew Stefaniak, Locked On Texas A&M Aggies. So, Andrew, Weigman hits the portal. This is not a big surprise, right? Marcel Reed takes the starting job from him. It's not like Weigman was bad this season. He was 4-1 as Texas A&M starter, but they go with Marcel Reed. The team that gets him, we'll talk about potential destinations, but the team that gets him is getting what?
They're getting a quarterback that, despite everything during his 3 seasons at Texas A&M, has a lot of upside. I don't know what his deal was with Colin Klein. I thought that would be a match made in heaven. It wasn't. It didn't work out. Weigman played poorly in the games that mattered most, Notre Dame and LSU. Obviously, Reed came in and found a way to win that game for A&M. But I think they're getting a quarterback who loves football and is willing to have someone teach him to be better. He needs to be better, and it might be a coaching issue. And we see this all the time. Players don't succeed. They transfer. They're great. I have a feeling Weigman's going to be one of those players. He's going to find a new home and be a really good player.
Do you feel like he needs a big support system around him? Like his numbers this year, they're not popping off the page per se, 3 touchdowns and 5 picks, 56%. But we've seen the glimpses, right? We've seen the flashes. We just haven't seen it become sustained success for him at the quarterback spot. Do you think it's because he wasn't in the right spot at Texas A&M or because he didn't have enough help with Texas A&M?
He had a lot better weapons last year. If you remember correctly, Connor Weigman was lights out before he got hurt last season. And then this year, the weapons weren't as good and it didn't click. I think that Connor Weigman, once again, the upside's there. Texas A&M's weapons were not great this year. Receiver was a massive problem, something I talk about a lot. And that's part of it too. I mean, Marcel Reed, it's a reason why he got benched in all honesty. Marcel Reed had the legs. Weigman can move, but he doesn't have Marcel Reed type legs. When there's not great receivers, he's a bit useless. If he goes to a place that has defined weapons that can help him out and a coaching staff that can just fine tune a few things, it's definitely there for Connor Weigman to be successful. I've called it. He's going to go somewhere and be great. I just have that feeling, and it's going to irk me a little bit, but it's going to happen.
Yeah, he seems like he could be a Tyler Shuck type. Like Shuck was better at Texas Tech, I think, than Weigman was overall at Texas A&M, but had injury history, experienced guy, former blue chip quarterback prospect. One team that I've seen get suggested for Connor Weigman as a potential landing spot is Auburn. Mm-hmm. I think that's highly fascinating for two reasons. Number one, Auburn has to go to the portal to get a quarterback because Hugh Freeze needs to win. You went 6-7, 5-7 your first 2 years. That's not the bill of goods that Auburn fans, I think, were expecting when he took over for Brian Harsin. Particularly this year, I think was a disappointment. First year, I think was all right, but this was a disappointing season for Auburn majorly, and it just came down to the quarterback position. Peyton Thorne wasn't good. He was not good until the second half of the year. So that's the first reason it's interesting. The second reason, though, is you talk about giving him support, giving him weapons. Cam Coleman is as good of a freshman wide receiver as there is in college football. He's kind of faded in the freshman wide receiver discussion nationally because Auburn isn't very good, but he is that guy. And if you keep him out of the transfer portal, that's a premier target to sell to Connor Weigman. Do you think Auburn is the sort of situation where he could succeed?
I think it'd be a good spot for him, knowing I believe in Hugh Freeze. I think Peyton Thorne kind of already was what Peyton Thorne was. I don't think there was much development there. So people say, well, I thought he was a quarterback guru. Why does Peyton Thorne stink? I think he kind of already was who he was. Connor Weigman, I think, is more, and he's been around for a while, but he hasn't played. I think he's more moldable. And you talk about the weapons. Cam Coleman's still there. I don't know if any of the other receivers. I know they got that Perry Thompson. I don't know if that kid's going to leave. Malcolm Sims. There's some good young receivers over at Auburn. Looking at that, he'd have the weapons. He would have the weapons, and I think Hugh Freeze is a better coach at coaching quarterbacks than Klein has proved so far this year, his 1 year at A&M. So I think it could be a successful landing spot for him, and I think it'd be really funny because then you'd see Connor Weigman coming into Kyle Field next year, which would be very interesting. And if that
high entertainment value for you and me, guys in the entertainment business, we'd be like, oh, sign us up for that one.
And I'll tell you this, you can already pin that one as a loss if he goes to Auburn and Auburn comes to Kyle Field because they'll win that one. I can already book. We've seen that enough in college football. But I do think that'd be a solid spot for him, knowing because Auburn has that 5-star quarterback they just signed. They need somebody for 1 or 2 years, maybe just 1 year. And I think Weigman could be a perfect fit for what they're looking for to bridge the gap over to their new quarterback, Deuce Knight.
So another team that I've seen suggested that I want to push back on is Oregon. And for those who don't know, I'm an Oregon guy, so I can speak to this pretty knowledgeably. 2 reasons that's not going to happen. The tie that I see get posted in articles with Connor Weigman is, well, his old friend Evan Stewart is over there. I think it is 60-40, maybe 65-35 likelihood that Evan Stewart goes to the NFL after the season. He doesn't have huge numbers, but his NFL pro prospects are really good. He could come back. He could. That's reason number 1. Reason number 2, Oregon's quarterback room is already set for the future. They're bringing in 2 blue-chip guys in the class of 2025. They've got Dante Moore on the roster. They've also got Austin Novosad, who's a former 4-star guy. Like, they have 4 scholarship quarterbacks there, and Dante Moore is the heir apparent. He was brought in to sit for a year with the idea he would start in 2025. So anytime you see Oregon thrown out there, I do not see that in any way, shape, or form being a realistic option. The other team I've seen is Georgia, and yeah, see, Andrew's making a face for those listening to the podcast. I don't see that one working either.
The names that I saw pop up, to be honest with you, I saw different names pop up. I mean, now I saw the names pop up like boom, right when he hit the portal, and I saw Louisville, Missouri, and there were some Syracuse. There's some names like that.
See.
That's who I saw pop up.
I like Syracuse.
That's what I've said.
Because Kyle McCord just went there. He feels a lot like Connor Weigman. Yeah. Veteran, former blue chip guy, didn't work out a big time program. Whatever offensive system Fran Brown's got cooking up there at Syracuse, clearly really good. Kyle McCord just led the country in passing. I would be lying if I'd said I've done a deep dive on Syracuse's receiver room, but at the very least, Andrew, I look at the success Kyle McCord had and feel like that can easily translate to Connor Weigman next year.
I think Syracuse is the perfect spot. And what's this guy's name here? There's a coach from Texas A&M, and I forget, he was there. Elijah Robinson. I blanked on his name. He was the guy that was the interim, right, when they fired Jimbo Fisher, and he's up there at Syracuse. So there's even some coaching staff, overlap there with Weigman and Syracuse.
I think that could be great.
I think Syracuse is the spot. That's the one. When I first saw that list, it was like Louisville, Missouri, and Syracuse. There was another score too. That was the one that immediately was like, man, Syracuse feels like it makes the most sense for him. Connor, like you said, Oregon, let's say, goodness forbid, they feel like they need to go get a quarterback in the portal. They can do better than Oregon. Just write a Nike check. We'll be fine. You can go get someone better than Connor Weigman. Auburn, I think, is a fit that makes sense. Georgia, no, just don't like that one at all. I think of the ones Auburn makes sense. I think Syracuse makes the most sense, though. I mean, in all seriousness.
I don't hate the Louisville option. I discussed that for Miller Moss yesterday. I think that's a pretty good fit with Jeff Brom. Jeff Brom is a quarterback guru. One of the more underrated, great quarterback coaches in the country is Louisville's head guy. So I could see that working. I mean, he had a great season with Tyler Shuck this past year. I could see that working with Weigman or Miller Moss, but with that, I'd watch for Syracuse because Kyle McCord is the same sort of guy. Like by the end of the year, Ohio State fans were, we can't. This guy, he's not throwing that. Look at the yardage. This is just not very good. Boom. Yeah. He is the nation's leading passer.
Yeah.
I'm glad you and I see eye to eye on that because I think that could be a great fit. And by the way, Fran Brown just had a phenomenal first year at Syracuse. 9-3, upset Miami at home to end the regular season with a 21-point comeback. They could have a 10-win year. That is a program right now that looks like it's on the rise. I think it could work for Syracuse. I think it could work for Connor Weigman as well. And Andrew Stefaniak always works for us. Locked on Texas A&M Aggies on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Andrew, appreciate it, my man. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.